his left shoulder and pulled the trigger as he was almost upon me. It stopped him. With a terrific howl of pain and rage, the brute rolled over and over upon the ground almost to my feet. As he came, I pumped 2 more bullets into him, and as he struggled to rise, clawing viciously at me, I put a bullet in his spine. That finished him, and I am free to admit that I was mighty glad of it. There was a great tree close behind me, and stepping within its shade, I leaned against it, wiping the perspiration from my face, for the day was hot, and the exertion and excitement left me exhausted. I stood there, resting for a moment, preparatory to turning and retracing my steps to the launch, when, without warning, something whizzed through space straight toward me. There was a dull thud of impact as it struck the tree, and as I dodged to one side and turned to look at the thing, I saw a heavy spear embedded in the wood not 3 inches from where my head had been. The thing had come from a little to one side of me, and without waiting to investigate at the instant, I leapt behind the tree, and, circling it, peered around to the other side to get a sight of my would-be murderer. This time I was pitted against men. The spear told me that all too plainly, but so long as they didn't take me unawares or from behind, I had little fear of them. Cautiously I edged about the far side of the trees until I could obtain a view of the spot from which the spear must have come, and when I did, I saw the head of a man just emerging from behind a bush. The fellow was quite similar in type to those I had seen upon the Isle of Wight. He was hairy and unkempt, and as he finally stepped into view, I saw that he was garbed in the same primitive fashion. He stood for a moment gazing about in search of me, and then he advanced. As he did so, a number of others precisely like him stepped from the concealing verdure of nearby bushes and followed in his wake. Keeping the trees between them and me, I ran back a short distance until I found a clump of underbrush that would effectually conceal me, for I wished to discover the strength of the party and its armament before attempting to parley with it. The useless destruction of any of these poor creatures was the farthest idea from my mind. I should have liked to have spoken with them, but I did not care to risk having to use my high-powered rifle upon them other than in the last extremity. Once in my new place of concealment, I watched them as they approached the tree. There were about 30 men in the party and 1 woman, a girl whose hands seemed to be bound behind her, and who was being pulled along by 2 of the men. They came forward warily, peering cautiously into every bush and halting often. At the body of the lion they paused, and I could see from their gesticulations and the higher pitch of their voices that they were much excited over my kill. But presently they resumed their search for me, and as they advanced I became suddenly aware of the unnecessary brutality with which the girl's guards were treating her. She stumbled once, not far from my place of concealment, and after the balance of the party had passed me, as she did so, one of the men at her side jerked her roughly to her feet and struck her across the mouth with his fist. Instantly my blood boiled, and forgetting every consideration of caution, I leapt from my concealment, and springing to the man's side, felled him with a blow. So unexpected had been my act that it found him and his fellow unprepared, but instantly the latter drew the knife that protruded from his belt and lunged viciously at me, at the same time giving voice to a wild cry of alarm. The girl shrank back at sight of me, her eyes wide in astonishment, and then my antagonist was upon me. I parried his first blow with my forearm, at the same time delivering a powerful blow to his jaw that sent him reeling back, but he was at me again in an instant, though in the brief interim I had time to draw my revolver. I saw his companion crawling slowly to his feet, and the others of the party racing down upon me. There was no time to argue now. other than with the weapons we wore, and so, as the fellow lunged at me again with the wicked-looking knife, I covered his heart and pulled the trigger. Without a sound he slipped to the earth, and then I turned the weapon upon the other guard, who was now about to attack me. He, too, collapsed, and I was alone with the astonished girl. The balance of the party was some 20 paces from us, but coming rapidly. I seized her arm and drew her after me behind a nearby tree, for I had seen that with both their comrades down, the others were preparing to launch their spears. With the girl safe behind the tree, I stepped out in sight of the advancing foe, shouting to them that I was no enemy, and that they should halt and listen to me. But for answer they only yelled in derision and launched a couple of spears at me, both of which missed. I saw then that I must fight, yet still I hated to slay them, and it was only as a final resort that I dropped 2 of them with my rifle, bringing the others to a temporary halt. Again I appealed to them to desist, but they only mistook my solicitude for them for fear, and with shouts of rage and derision leapt forward once again to overwhelm me. It was now quite evident that I must punish them severely, or myself die and relinquish the girl once more to her captors. Neither of these things had I the slightest notion of doing, and so I again stepped from behind the tree, and with all the care and deliberation of target practice, I commenced picking off the foremost of my assailants. One by one the wild men dropped. Yet on came the others, fierce and vengeful, until only a few remaining. These seemed to realize the futility of combating my modern weapon with their primitive spears, and, still howling wrathfully, withdrew toward the west. Now, for the first time, I had an opportunity to turn my attention toward the girl, who had stood, silent and motionless, behind me as I pumped death into my enemies and hers from my automatic rifle. She was of medium height, well-formed, and with fine, clear-cut features. Her forehead was high, and her eyes both intelligent and beautiful. Exposure to the sun had browned a smooth and velvety skin to a shade which seemed to enhance rather than mar an altogether lovely picture of youthful femininity. A trace of apprehension marked her expression. I cannot call it fear, since I have learned to know her, and astonishment was still apparent in her eyes. She stood quite erect, her hands still bound behind her, and met my gaze with level, proud return. "What language do you speak?" I asked. "Do you understand mine?" "Yes," she replied. "It is similar to my own. I am Grabritin. What are you?" "I am Pan-American," I answered. She shook her head. "What is that?" I pointed toward the west, far away across the ocean. Her expression altered a trifle. A slight frown contracted her brow. The expression of apprehension deepened. "Take off your cap," she said, and when, to humor her strange request, I did as she bid, she appeared relieved. Then she edged to one side and leaned over, seemingly to peer behind me. I turned quickly to see what she discovered, but finding nothing, wheeled about to see that her expression was once more altered. "You are not from there?" and she pointed toward the east. It was a half-question. "You are not from across the water there?" "No," I assured her. "I am from Pan-America, far away to the west. Have you ever heard of Pan-America?" She shook her head in negation. "I do not care where you come from," she explained, "if you are not from there, and I am sure you are not, for the men from there have horns and tails." It was with difficulty that I restrained a smile. "Who are the men from there?" I asked. "They are bad men," she replied. "Some of my people do not believe that there are such creatures, but we have a legend, a very old, old legend,